Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. I've been running for a few years now and have the privilege of meeting many incredible runners on my travels all across the country. This podcast is intended to share those amazing conversations. This week's podcast is sponsored by Synchronet, powered by Wigwam. Synchronet uses breakthrough technology, creating a truly fitted sock that doesn't slip, and it enhances the performance of a running shoe. They're tight on the arch and heel, which makes it feel snug. Go to synchronet.com, synchronit.com, and enter in the code LONGRUN25 to receive 25% off. I'll be wearing them this spring, and you should too. Enjoy. And welcome back. I'm here today with Jacob Puzey. Jacob, thanks for joining in today.
Thank you, Jonathan. Pleasure to be here with you.
For sure. So we are recording on a new platform today. I normally use in-person interviews, but in today's fun environment, I've migrated over to Zoom, and now I'm on to Zencastr after doing an interview with you on Zencastr. So thanks for showing me the ropes here.
Yeah, I'm still learning as I go as well. It's not the first platform that I tried, but it seems to be provide better quality than at least some of the previous efforts that I made to do remote interviews. So. For sure. So if you're tuning in, and if you've listened to a couple of the episodes that I've released in the last few weeks or last week or two, thank you for the slack on the quality or the feedback on the quality. I'm doing my best. I wish that the sound quality was not an issue, but thanks for bearing with me as I figure this out along the way. So now that that's taken care of, who is Jacob? Let's kick it off from there. Oh, wow. So I guess I wear a lot of different hats. I think the role or responsibilities that I think of the most when I think of who I am is that of father. I am a father to 6 children in a blended family. So I have 2 stepdaughters, 2 biological children from a previous marriage, and then my wife Amy and I have 2 children together. So it's a it's a blended and messy and muddy life that we lead, but it occupies most of my thoughts and dreams and aspirations. So it gets me up in the morning. It's what it really is the one goal that I had in life was to be a dad. And it's also probably the one thing I've failed at most in life. But it's also by far the most rewarding and fulfilling and heartbreaking thing I've ever done. Let's see. I'm on this podcast probably because I run, and I happen to also coach and race direct, and somehow I've the stars have aligned and enabled me to essentially make a living as a coach and a race director and as a runner. And I also now have a podcast called the Art and Science of Running Podcast. I really enjoy reading and writing. I was a teacher and also kind of an academic for a while. I have a background in a lot of different things, but the last thing I was in school for was anthropology because it was kind of the catch-all for everything. So I guess I could call myself an anthropologist as well. But I'm just an interested person, and I have a lot of interests and a lot of passions. But
cool. So you had me on your podcast, The Art and Science of Running, a couple weeks ago. We talked a lot about running and performance and the journey and the process, and that's pretty similar to the exploration we do here on For the Long Run. But you have sort of a topical focus that I want to get into eventually.
Mm-hmm.
You had shared some ideas about how we can steer this conversation, but I want to keep it a little bit a little evergreen, at least to start. And I want to know why did you start running? What motivated you to get out the door the first time?
Yeah. I grew up in the southwestern United States, and in a small. I was actually born on a farm, and always lived in small homes with lots of kids. There's 6 kids in my family, and there wasn't a lot of money, and so kind of the most natural thing to do was to be outside. And I don't remember much time inside our home growing up. Like we were just outside our entire lives, and it really up until after dark. That was, and we were usually upset that we had to come home, and it was kind of just a standing rule that we usually had to hose off in the backyard and take all our clothes off before we could come inside, because we usually came home just like covered in mud and dirt and grime and probably manure and other things. And so in a lot of ways, I lived an enchanted childhood in that I just played hard a lot. And then as I got older, I learned to work hard a lot. And so competitive running was kind of the intersection of those two things that I was taught from the time I was born. Just kind of you're responsible for yourself. You need to be accountable for your own actions. And you also, need to spend as much time as possible outside. So I started competitive running, I guess, in 7th grade, technically. And that was not because of something that I'm terribly proud of, but I got kicked off the tennis team because it was right after basketball season, and I wanted to be a baller, but I was, like 4'11" and had a size 30 foot. So it was really awkward. I'd trip over my own feet running down the court, but I hadn't quite grown into my feet yet. So anyway, I had little man syndrome, and I talked a lot of trash. And so I thought you could do that in tennis because, I liked Andre Agassi and some of the other guys that were a bit more vocal and rebels on the tennis court. So I tried to do that, and I got kicked off 2 years in a row, actually, from tennis for talking too much trash. And so I kind of got forced to run track. And then in 8th grade, I ran cross country to get in shape for basketball, and because it was co-ed, and my friend was doing it, his cousin, who was also a friend, but was also pretty, was doing it. So I kind of started for, I would say, the wrong reasons. It wasn't because I had an interest in running per se, but that's how and why I got started. But I wasn't good. It took an entire season to finish a cross country race, like a 1.5 mile cross country race, without stopping and walking. And that was training every day to be able to do that. And I think part of it was just not knowing how to pace myself, and just, I was competitive in terms of in my own mind, I had high standards for myself. So I just wanted to stick my nose in and throw down, and I wasn't capable of doing that. So, and like I said, I was young for my grade. I was small. I was a late bloomer. So it took probably 2 or 3 years now, I guess, if you think about it, for me to come into my own, and for my body to actually absorb the training I was doing and to figure things out mentally and physically, and for my body to start catching up with the size of my feet. And so it probably wasn't until the end of 9th grade, and this was basically 2.5 years of continuous running, that that things started to click, and I started to actually see myself as a runner and want to be a runner. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Now, fast forward to today. You're race directing, you're coaching, and all sorts of things. So, how did you get into race directing and coaching?
Um, let's see. I started coaching. I guess formally, I started coaching. I I took a stint off from running for
Mm-hmm.
for 2 years to do kind of a some humanitarian work in Latin America. And when I returned to school, the university that I had been attending and that I had run for the previous 2 seasons, they had eliminated their athletic program, and so I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
a team to come back to, and I didn't have a scholarship. But my coach was still there; he was still an employee at the school, and they were kind of creating this a pretty big intramural program, I guess. And so he asked me if I wanted to be a coach and kind of the track meet director for the track program. And so there were, I don't know, I would say probably at least 100 or more students that were participating in track, but on different teams, so to speak. And so I didn't have to. I was able to pay for my school in part by being a track meet director and a coach. So I did that just for my first semester after returning, and then I transferred to another school in Hawaii that had an athletic program. One of my former teammates had transferred there and was running on the cross country team there. They weren't very good, so I was able to get a scholarship after having not run for 2 consecutive years, and that gave me a chance to kind of like fall back in love with running and like get back in shape slowly without a ton of pressure. And I got to live in Hawaii for free, so that was cool. But what was also fun was that the local high school, this was on the North Shore of Oahu. The local high school is called Kahuku High School. They needed some help with the distance program in track, and we didn't have a track team at the university, and so I only competed in the fall, and so I had the spring open to like dedicate to coaching the team, and the school was about 3 miles down the road, so I rush out of my last class of the day, sprint, basically do a tempo run on the way to practice, then run with the kids, and then run home, cool down on the way home. And I fell in love with that process. I fell in love with the kids. I fell in love with the community. And this was it's a pretty local community. Lots of people that didn't look like me, basically. And in fact, the high school is one of the top producers of NFL players in the country, so they very much didn't look like me. And they're known to kind of be not just that community, but just it's not an easy thing to be a haole in Hawaii. In some cases, and instead of being treated that way, the community embraced me, and it was a beautiful thing. I poured my heart and soul into those kids, and those kids and those parents. They called me Kama Aina. They said I was one with the land and one with them, and it was a beautiful thing. And I never imagined doing that. I had lots of different aspirations that had nothing to do with running, and it's kind of on the fast track to doing something professional and corporate. And both my time in Latin America and my time in Polynesia just turned that all on its head. And I wanted to be a part of a community, and I wanted to give back. I wanted to stop focusing so much on my own advancement and wanted to feel like I was doing something meaningful with my life.
Cool. Let's talk about community. What's your take, or what is your local community like?
Now I'm going to sound like a total hypocrite. I'm not terribly involved with my current local community. I live
Or
in.
let's talk about the running community in general then.
Yeah, no. Well, I think it. I'd like. I think it. This dovetails, but I will get into the running community. So I actually live in a place where there is a strong running and outdoor community. I live in Canmore, Alberta, which is between Calgary and Banff. It's in the Rockies. It's beautiful. There are run groups that get together and do speed workouts and get together and do kind of easy social runs. Those happen in the evenings, which is usually during dinner time and story time and, bath time. And so I don't participate in those things. And it's very rare that I run with anyone other than my dog occasionally, or, occasionally if someone comes into town, I may be able to break free and go for a run. But it actually kind of creates anxiety for me with so many other moving parts for me to create too many plans because I know that with so many kids and so many other people's schedules that I'm responsible for, I try really hard not to overcommit because I hate bailing and having to, just like with this interview, having to change it because of something. But part of that, I guess I could go back to, I don't know how to not be all in. Like that's my blessing and my curse, probably job interview on The Office, but I'm all in with everything that I do. And I coached for about a decade, and I like I said, I poured my heart and soul into those kids and that community, and in Hawaii and then back in Oregon in my alma mater. And I actually had to step back because it was getting to the point where, one, because people knew that I was all in, there was no end to the asks and, or the expectations of what I would do. But then I had my own kids, and I was missing my own kids' activities to be at other people's kids' activities, and that just wasn't working. And so I had to step back and say, okay, I can't do this anymore. I can't. I actually came to the realization at the National Cross Country Junior Olympic Championships down in San Antonio. I was there with, again, a bunch of people's kids. It was paid for by Nike. It was fun to be there. It was fun to see my kids place well and meet some famous athletes and then be treated like kings when we returned. But I missed my son's basketball game, and that it was just too much. It was already out of season. It was 2 months after the season, and I was still coaching other people's kids, and I wasn't there at my own kids' game. And so I just had to. It wasn't something that my now ex-wife asked me to do. It was just something I didn't feel right about. And so I stepped back, and so that's actually something I have to try really hard with my own running and with my own community involvement, is that I know that if I commit to something, I can't bail. That's just ingrained in me. And so I try not to commit to things that I can't put my heart and soul into. So I race less, and I put on some races, and those are those take a lot of energy, and I do put my heart and soul into those, but I try really hard to schedule those activities, whether they be races that I'm running or races that I'm directing, at times where I do have greater flexibility, or I know that I can put more time into those events. So yeah, I gave a lot to the running community for a long time, and I still try to do that. But I feel like I'm not as active as far as like a social member, apart from social media, from day to day.
Well, cool. But you are fairly involved from the management standpoint. So let's talk about Five Peaks. Let's talk about your coaching, and sort of the state of affairs of where that's all at today.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Five Peaks is it's called Five Peaks Trail Running. That's a nationwide trail running series with about 30 events across Canada.
Nationwide in Canada, right?
Nationwide in Canada, yeah. Sorry. There really isn't anything comparable to it in the U.S. There are series, there are race directing companies, but they seem more regional. The North Face stuff that was in existence, this is different, like both in terms of scale and size. Like most of the events are at least 500 participants, and some of them are closer to 1,000. It's rare that you can get a permit in the U.S. for more than 200 people at for a lot of trail events and stuff like that. Or 400 is considered really big, So it's different, but that's mainly Amy's gig. So my wife Amy is the principal owner and operator and national race director of Five Peaks Trail Running. So she was doing that before we met. And so there are 5 regions, across the country, and two in Alberta, one in British Columbia, one in Ontario, and one in Quebec. And in each of those regions, there are between 3 and 6 events, either that are part of a series. And most people would consider them, they're not ultras. Most of them aren't ultras, and there are also a couple other standalone events. So that's mostly Amy's thing. I by association, I try and help out. So I've managed the social media for a bit. I'm no longer doing that just because I was already busy enough with some of the other things. But I deal with storage, or we run ideas off of one another. So that's mostly hers. She and I do direct an event apart from Five Peaks that's actually in partnership with Trans Rockies, and that's called the Trans Selkirks Run. And that's in a place called Revelstoke, British Columbia. And that's a 3 or 5 day stage race that we put on together with the support and staff or in partnership with Trans Rockies events. And that's in part because she and I met at the Trans Rockies Run in Colorado in 2015. And we just felt like it'd be cool to do something like that, but in Canada, with maybe a bit more single track and access to kind of the rugged backcountry, but also maybe a little more family friendly and resort based. So that's what the Trans Selkirks Run is. And we've done that. I think this will be our 3rd or 4th year in Revelstoke, putting that on. So
cool. How has so I know one of the things you had mentioned was talking about canceling and postponing events and why refunds and transfers work or don't work, and how it impacts the race organization. I think that there are a lot of races that are canceling outright. Some are offering deferred entry to later in the year or next year, or translating to virtual races. What is it that runners need to know that they probably don't know based on what's going on behind the scenes that we should all be aware about with the races that we love and want to support?
I mean, it really does vary from race to race, and whether it is kind of a standalone event or if it's if it's something like a big city marathon, or if it's a kind of a small business operation, or if it's nonprofit or whatever, chances are there's at least one person, if not a team of people, where that's their full-time job or a big part of what they do. Like Amy's full-time job is to be the national race director. My role with Trans Selkirks Run occupies significant time throughout the entire year. And so some people, they get paid a salary. Some people, they get paid in one lump sum after the race, or it depends on how it's arranged and stuff like that, if it's their job. I know that, a few years ago, the New York City Marathon got canceled, and it was at the last minute, and people were upset that they didn't get refunds. And it was like the part that people failed to understand is that every single employee of the New York Roadrunners and every contracted support staff, whether that included the police or whatever else, they had all already done their job, or at the minimum, the fees had already been paid for the services that they had agreed to render. And so by the time you get to race day, there isn't any money left. I mean, most of the time you're scraping the bottom of the barrel to like, have something to start the next event, the next year's events with, or something like that. And that's not just in my case. I think there's a perception that race directors are like rolling in it, and that's the case. I actually started after my gig with at the university, where I was just the intramural track meet director. During the last recession that we were in, I was a high school coach, but I was also responsible for the 2 middle school feeder programs in the town that I was in rural Oregon. And I became responsible in part because they just cut the programs. They cut funding for everything, anything that wasn't essential, like football, got cut. And so I started it started with one event, and then it became like a series of like 5 or 6 events each year, in large part just to fund the middle school and high school programs, not so that I could pay myself. Like I usually made sure that, I didn't take a cent from any of the races that we put on, but it was all nonprofit to just keep the middle school programs afloat, to pay for buses, to help. This was in a place where probably 60, if not more % of the athletes on my team lived below the poverty line. Most of them couldn't afford shoes, or at least as many shoes as they needed, couldn't afford to go to camps. We often couldn't afford to go to invitationals. And so that was how we went from having a shoestring budget to having nothing, to trying to, both get community involvement and support, but also teach the kids to give back and to understand what, like my cross country team and a few of the parents were the people putting on the races. They were out there on the course and stuff like that. And so I did that in part to raise money. And I think that's why most people start and get into the road or into the race directing business. It's because they want to do something for their community, or they want to give back to the sport. They, whether it's that they want an excuse to get all their friends to come back together, like to have a reunion. That's right. What trail races often end up being, like ultras. That's what Trans-Selkirks is. Like some of my best friends from throughout my life come up and help me put that race on, because it is, I mean, it's a ton of work, and it's exhausting, but it's also really fun to like fall asleep every night totally exhausted, and then wake up and work really hard all day in a beautiful place and get to do that with people that you love. So I think that's the real motive behind most people putting on races and wanting to give a really unique experience to runners, or somehow do something special for athletes. I honestly think there are very few people who have a profit motive in mind when they decide to put on. And, but then the hard part is, if you have done it right, and if you've tried to put everything back into the race and give it back to the racers, like I said, you likely don't have much left, especially when at the last minute you have to make a call to cancel a race. And in the case of the Trans-Selkirks run, there hasn't been a year that we've done it when we haven't, like up until the last night before the event, or even before a certain stage, we've been in meetings like at past midnight trying to decide, are we going to run this stage tomorrow? There were grizzlies on the trail yesterday, to figure out whether we can go there tomorrow or not, or 200 trees just blew down in a windstorm the day before the race was supposed to start, and we that's the only route we have permitted, but we don't have enough chainsaws and enough people to remove all those trees, or there's a wildfire and there's smoke. And I mean, there's always something going on, not just with that event, but with almost every event. Even if there's a heavy rain and you want to be a good steward of the trails and you don't want to create trail braiding and erosion, but there may not be another open date to secure that venue, or any venue. They're already booked, usually a year in advance. And so I I just don't think many people understand how much work goes into putting the events on, how much love goes into them, how much stress goes into them, and and how hard it is to make that call. Like most race directors want the racers to be safe, and that's their number one priority. And yet at the same time, they will do anything they possibly can to make sure that you have that experience that you've been preparing for. And so it's a really tough call to cancel, but it's also sometimes it is impossible to postpone or to pick another date. I mean, already Boston and London have scheduled things in the fall, and so that calendar is already getting really saturated for people. A lot of race directors try and respect one another as well. So like, if we know that there are other races going on, we usually try and not just to not oversaturate the calendar, but out of respect for competing race organizations and race directors, we try to say, okay, you want this weekend, can we have next weekend or something like that, or try and space them out even more. If there's something like this, like mass cancellations going on, there isn't the ability to do that. And then basically everyone loses. The runners lose, right. The race directors lose. And so my suggestion, and this isn't out of selfishness, I don't think, because this is for all race directors and all racers. If your race has been canceled or postponed, or if there's an option to do something virtually or to donate your entry, my recommendation would be to do that and to try not to. Anyone who had any money in the stock market is suffering financially right now, or is scrambling and trying to figure out what to make sense of. That might be retirement, that might be extra savings, whatever that might be. I think we're struggling in that respect. There's a lot of uncertainty and instability right now. But at the same time, in most cases, race director, most waivers already say that, like, if the race gets canceled, if you get injured, if anything else, like, sorry, like you don't get a refund. Almost every waiver I've ever seen says that. And so for people to expect that, even though they've signed a contract saying that they are okay with that, is disheartening. And then when race directors, again, take on the additional work to try and find an alternative date or alternative venue or another means of doing it, when people don't at least acknowledge that there are efforts being made for the race director to go above and beyond to fulfill part of the contract because they care about their event and they care about the runners, it's disheartening. Like it actually makes you want to disassociate from fellow runners when you see most of it is really positive, but then all it takes is one email can just it can ruin your day. And then when you get them in mass, it's just like, wow, why am I even doing this? It can be really, really challenging. So that's depressing. Sorry.
No, I think it's good. I mean, like, there's a lot of people don't know what to expect, and they think that, all the costs happen on race day and that's it. But there's so much that's going on behind the scenes that makes it impossible. I'm just thinking of like think of the Olympics and think of all the craziness going into rescheduling that. So let's talk. So you also mentioned that you're a teacher, or you've been a teacher, and you work from home, and you have some experience with homeschooling. What advice do you have for people at a time like this that are maybe navigating working from home and childcare at the same time?
Yeah. So yeah, I was a teacher of different levels and grades and subjects for about a decade. And that was kind of the decade when I was also a coach, but like an in-person coach of either high school or college athletes. And that was mostly the age groups that I taught. I did have to do some kindergarten through sixth grade practicum. And it was pretty clear that when I went from teaching college courses to being in the elementary levels, about the only thing I was good at was recess, and it was fun to dunk on the kids. But other than that, that was about all I could
do. Perpetually. I was a camp counselor for third and fourth graders, and I've been 5'6" since probably, I don't know, I was 17 years old. So yeah, dunking on kids was that's my favorite.
It's fun, and they think it's so cool. You can
yeah, right.
The entire class, and you're like, "Watch! I'm going to dribble between my legs, and I'm going to keep the ball away from you, and then I'm going to dunk it on all of you." And not mostly because it's fun. Like my own kids, that's their favorite.
Key takeaway is to, if you're following Ben Bruce, you know that he's got a Pop-A-Shot in his basement. You couldn't dunk on those, but you can only do it once.
True story.
So maybe your takeaway here is to get one of those rubber or plastic 5-foot hoops and just start dunking on your 6-year-olds. Is that the takeaway here?
One of the takeaways. Anytime you can include basketball or any sort of sport in the house, like kids love that. And so one of my favorite things, like we're stuck inside for a lot of the days, and especially now we usually have childcare. Right now, Amy and I are splitting the day up 4 hours at a time, so that we can each at least have some dedicated time to work and if we can to get in a run or something like that. But yeah, we definitely have the little tyke basketball hoops and the balls. But I mean, my youngest kids, they like the lacrosse balls that I roll my feet out on. And then, my middle-aged kids like the kettlebells, and, the kids think it's amazing, fun to roll around on foam rollers and stuff like that. So some of the stuff that we have as runners can be toys for our kids, and they seem to think they're pretty fun. But yeah, I like I said, I had pretty eclectic interests while studying. And so I studied a lot of different subjects, and therefore was able to teach a lot of different subjects. I was never planning on being a teacher. I thought I'd be a lawyer or a physical therapist. And so I took a lot of those types of courses that would allow me to do that while I was falling in love with coaching. And so when I returned to my alma mater in Oregon, they kind of just asked me to teach everything that I could pass a test to teach, which was kind of everything. And so, or I needed credits to be able to do it too, but I also had like 100 more credits than I was supposed to have when I finished my undergraduate stuff. So I had a lot of, I was in school for a while because I was able to do that with deferments and red shirts and stuff like that. So I was getting paid to go to school, so I just took advantage of it. So as far as the things that I learned as a high school and as a middle school teacher, and also with as many kids as we have, one of the biggest things that kids struggle with and that teachers struggle with, and that the standardized tests say they need to do better at, is nonfiction reading. And so during this time, I think it's a good thing for kids to be bored and to not have every single second scheduled, even though that's kind of what they're used to, with especially elementary school kids at school. If I think back to my own upbringing, the books that have had the most profound impact on my life were books that I read at home that were not required reading from school, but they were books that I read because I was interested in a subject. So when I was a little kid, I used to check out books about reptiles because I lived in the Southwest, and I was finding different reptiles, and I wanted to know what they were. I wanted to know what they ate. I wanted to know if they were poisonous. I wanted to know if I could bring them home with me and make them pets, or if I should avoid them. And then as I started getting into sports, I read everything I possibly could about basketball. I read everything I possibly could about running. I subscribed to running magazines and bought a lot of books, and most of that was with my own money that I would earn, as a paper boy or mowing lawns or things like that, or that I check out at the library. And I don't see very many kids doing that kind of stuff anymore. And I didn't see that when I was a teacher. And so one of the things that I encouraged kids to do was just and parents of kids, was to make sure that there were always books around, and that kids read what they were interested in. And if it's something they're interested in, they will read, and it won't feel like work. It will be pleasure. And that can be fantasy, or that can be sci-fi, or that can be comic books. I mean, I have a 13-year-old son who loves comics and graphic novels, but I mean, a lot of it's pretty advanced stuff that he likes to read about, and he'll devour those things. And I have a rule in our house that if the kid asks for a book, I will buy them the book, or we will at least go to the library to get the book. But right now, if we need to order stuff from Amazon, it's not like I have unlimited funds. That's still worth it to me. Like I think books are one of the best investments that you can possibly make. And so, have a lot of books around, and let your kids read at their leisure, and make sure that they don't have enough to distract them from reading around as well. So, turn off the devices, get rid of devices, remove them from certain rooms. And then at the same time, because most of our kids do know how to use the devices, I would recommend that they use them and not just ask Siri, or Alexa or whatever. And I apologize to those who work for those companies and stuff like that. But teach them how to do a real search, and teach them how to find out information. So whether that's a recipe, and trying to figure out what food items we have in the house, that we can make something with, and avoid going to the store, and also learning what we might be able to use as a replacement if we don't have certain things. And so there are just lessons that can be learned, like practical lessons that will encourage nonfiction reading and problem solving and engineering, and project-based learning and things like that. And so I think a lot of parents are stressed out about, I don't know how to do this. And my number one suggestion would be just have your kids read, discuss what they're reading. If you choose to listen to the news around the kids, I would say minimize that as much as possible. I would say minimize it even if you're not doing it around your kids, but just, consume what you need to consume, and then like cap it at at the daily recap of whatever the news is that day. Otherwise, I think we'll all get depressed. But then discuss the news with the kids, and if you choose to watch things with your kids, make it a discussion, or have them write about it. And as a teacher, I got threatened almost annually that I was going to work myself out of a job because too many of my students were passing the tests that were allowing them to be removed from the program that I managed at the secondary level, in the district that I was at, for second language learners and stuff like that. And the only thing I did was I approached literacy like I approach running. It's like, some running is good, more running is usually better. Some reading is good, more reading is usually better. Some writing is good, more writing is usually better. And I just taught my kids to run as much as they could, and write as much as they could, and read as much as they could. A lot of my athletes were second language learners. And so I had a library of over 100 books about running, and I used to reward them. And some of them could even, they could earn a varsity letter, through a combination of miles logged and or pages read about running. And we had a really good team. And we also had a lot of kids who were not expected to even graduate from high school, get college scholarships and college degrees because of that. And so my recommendation to parents, it's a lot easier when they're not your own kids, but to parents with your kids at home is just, man, give your kids information and give them access to resources, but have discussions with them. Take some time to prepare meals together. Take some time to discuss all sorts of ideas together as a family, over dinner or while preparing meals, or take your kids on walks and learn about what you see on your walks if you are able to leave the house. And I don't know. For me, I'm like, I feel like I've already made better connections with my kids just in this short time. And even with my siblings and with other nieces and nephews who I don't usually have enough time to be in contact with. And so in some ways, I feel more connected because of the technologies that are available to us. And at the same time, I feel like I'm I took one of my daughters driving the other day, who just got her permit, and I wasn't in a rush to get home. So we spent an hour in a full on blizzard driving, when normally, okay, we should probably shut this thing down after 10 minutes. But it was like, why? And we were listening to Justin Bieber's latest album, which, it wasn't my request that that's what we listened to, but I was chill enough that it didn't freak me out either, that that's what we were doing. Was just like, what, we've got nothing but time, so let's just enjoy it. And she learned a lot just in that 1 hour. It was fun to see her light up and her shoulders relax and her feel more confident after an hour of driving, because she'd never driven for that amount of time. And all we did was go in circles around the block. It wasn't like we were doing anything treacherous, but it was snowing bad enough that it was like a different route each lap that we made of the block. So anyway, I think there's just a lot of opportunities. And so, don't overcomplicate it. Just kids need to learn how to read and write and problem solve and articulate their ideas. So
cool.
Model that for them.
In terms of working with your athletes, what's been the North Star, the guiding principle that you've been sharing with them?
Well, everyone is different, and so that's part of it. Is that you don't have to do what the other members of the team are doing. I would just say the guiding principle would just be keep calm. Panicking isn't going to help anyone, but also be responsible. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself and your family, but also be mindful of how that will impact positively or negatively others, whether they be in the running community or just in the community at large. But this has certainly been the busiest I've ever been, because everyone's schedule has just totally changed, whether that be work schedule or training schedule or race schedule. And so there's just a lot more shuffling. And so I'm encouraging people to run by feel and to do what they can with what they can do. But even that's changing from day to day, the different shelter interpretations or renditions of what shelter in place means, whether that actually means you can't leave your domicile or whether that means you just can't be with people outside of your immediate family with whom you reside. So it is different, including what their profession is. I work with a number of people that work in healthcare or travel or different industries. And so their jobs and their risk is either greater or less depending on what the demands of their current work situation are. So, yeah.
Cool. Where can we find you on social or the internet if we want to follow along with you or find out more about what you're doing and how to get involved?
Yeah. Peak Run Performance is like my website or the coaching website. It's also where I try and share the most articles and content that I create, in addition to the Art and Science of Running podcast. So that's Art Science Run and .com or peakrunperformance.com. If people want to connect directly with me, you can do so through Twitter or Instagram or Facebook at Jacob Puzey. That's Puzey. I'm usually online. That's what I've been doing for the past 5 years or so, is working from home online as an online running coach and as a race director. So I'm usually online in some form or fashion. Lately, my response time has probably been a bit delayed, whether that be through my site or through social media, just because there's a lot going on and a lot of kids running around. So.
Cool. Well, Jacob, thanks so much for joining today, and hope to see you near Banff sometime soon.
Yeah, love to have you out here.
Cool.
Now the border's closed, so as soon as the border opens, come on up for a visit.
Okay, maybe not soon, but eventually.
Yeah, this is good timing. If you can, the first grizzlies are already out, and so but they're not going to find any people to eat in the next little while, hopefully. And so, get past that first little itch where they're getting out of hibernation. And once the border opens, they will have found enough food that they won't be looking for people. So, yeah.
Listen, I will always socially distance myself from grizzly bears, so we'll leave it at that.
That's practice right there. Yeah. All right.
Cool.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Take care.
Bye. Thanks again to Synchronet for sponsoring this week's podcast. Synchronet uses breakthrough technology, creating a truly fitted sock that doesn't slip in your shoe and enhances the performance of a running shoe. They're tight on the arch and heel, which makes it feel snug. As a reminder, you can use the code LONGRUN25 to receive 25% off your first order at synchronet.com. That's SYNCHROKNIT.com. I'll be wearing them this spring, and you should too. That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next week on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you've enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too.